Russia has been drawn into the US presidential race numerous times with allegations of email hacking and leaks about the campaigns. Whether Americans select Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump in the November general election, the next US president and Russian President Vladimir Putin will face numerous issues and conflicts, including Ukraine, Syria and ISIL. We begin our coverage with this report from CCTV's Julia Lyubova from Moscow.
Moscow brushes aside any accusations of meddling in the US election campaign. In fact, Moscow calls these accusations a string of pseudo-sensations. Russian intelligence services were alleged to have hacked into and leaked emails from the Democratic National Committee, with the Kremlin accused US politicians of using what it calls an illusory Russian threat as a trump card. But in fact, Moscow has made it quite clear who it would like to see as the new president of the United States. Vladimir Putin has already called Donald Trump a very talented person, and Russian state media has been showing a string of Trump-friendly reports, while it portrays Hillary Clinton as somebody who cannot be trusted. As a result, this is reflected in the mood of the public, and the research company YouGov carried out a poll in Russia in May, and that showed that more than 30% of Russians would like to see Donald Trump as the new president of the United States, while Hillary Clinton got just about 10% of support. And while Vladimir Putin would prefer to see a Moscow-friendly US president, Moscow and Washington continue to cooperate in many areas. Moscow and Washington are closely negotiating on Syria, and the two countries have helped to reach an agreement with Iran on its nuclear program. It's a tricky relationship between the two countries. There are many common grounds. However, there are many disagreements at the same time as well, for example, on the future of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and also on Ukraine. But when Hillary Clinton was the US Secretary of State, she famously pressed the reset button with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And now Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is ready to work with any new US president. And it remains to be seen if that reset button can be pressed once again between Moscow and Washington. Julia Lyubova, CCTV, Moscow.
Joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Ray McGovern. He served as an analyst for the Central Intelligence Agency for 27 years. From Providence, Rhode Island, we're joined by Vladimir Golstein. He's an associate professor of Slavic Studies at Brown University. Also with us here in Washington is Jim Jatras. He's a former U.S. diplomat and served as a policy advisor and analyst for the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate. Welcome to all of you. Ray McGovern, Russia, willingly or unwillingly, has been drawn into this election campaign. As we just heard, the Russians have been accused of hacking the computers of the Democratic National Committee. Trump has been accused of being disloyal. In fact, he's also been accused of acting in the interests of Russia. What do you make of this? Is it just a distraction, or can it do some damage here?
Well, it's hard to suppress a laugh here for several reasons. You mentioned distraction. Well, this is a magnificent obsession distraction. What happened was someone leaked, not hacked, leaked to WikiLeaks, incriminating information indicating that Hillary Clinton and her pals on the Democratic National Committee stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. It's right there in the emails, clear as day. 4 of the top officials from the DNC were immediately canned. And how are they going to explain this right before the convention? And so, oh, Russia did it. Russia did it. And so I said, well, what do you mean Russia did it? Well, and then they construct this whole thing where the media just falls right into line. Said the Russians did it. Why did the Russians do it? Because they want to get Hillary Clinton, because they prefer Donald Trump. Now, yeah, I know something about Russian leaders, okay? Someone who advertises themselves as totally unpredictable and proud of it, that's the last person that Vladimir Putin or anyone else would want to have as the president of the United States. I don't know how bad, I don't care how bad Hillary Clinton is, and she's pretty bad, but the notion that the Russians would prefer to have Trump, you know, the Russians, I mean, the Russians at the top, not the men in the street. Right. That's ridiculous on its face. So the whole premise is wrong, and the whole argument, they want to hurt Hillary to help Trump, and therefore they leaked it to WikiLeaks. Of course, WikiLeaks is quite capable of receiving leaks all by itself, as we have known from the past.
Vladimir, Russia has denied these accusations, and it may or may not be election rhetoric, but in reality, will it hurt relations between the United States and Russia?
Well, I don't think it will hurt a relationship because I suspect players on both sides know what's going on. Russians know that this is some kind of an election gimmick, election trick, that obviously Democratic campaign is not doing very well, primarily because their record is weak. Their message is weak. So they are blaming messenger now. They are trying to say something bad about Russia, something bad about Trump. But the fact is that it's very difficult for them to connect with American people. American people see economy floundering. American people see that foreign policy, endless amount of mistakes. So this rhetoric of trying to avoid these issues and blaming Russia is just a ploy. And media magnifies it, creates echo chambers. So I suspect that some of the American public fall for that. But I don't think Russian leadership falls for that, and I don't think even people in the know in Democratic Party fall for that. So it's just a gimmick, I suspect.
Jim, what is your view on this? Especially, what is behind Donald Trump's apparent admiration for Vladimir Putin?
I think I'm going to disagree with my colleagues here a little bit because I think it is quite damaging. If you look at the essence of this, it is a smokescreen. It is something that's thrown out by Hillary and her people to hide the corruption, frankly, that Ray refers to. But I do think it is damaging to have this kind of neo-McCarthyite atmosphere of hatred, not only toward Donald Trump, but toward Russia and obviously toward Vladimir Putin. Because you think of what Trump has actually said. What is his big offense? Why did Michael Morell, former acting director of the CIA, accused him of being an unwitting agent of influence for the Kremlin? Because he wants to get along with the Russians rather than call them names like thug and Hitler and things like this, language that somebody like Hillary Clinton has used, and frankly a lot of Republican politicians as well, that if we get away from this neoconservative maniacal hatred of Russia and see where our interests coincide in places like Syria, where we do have interests in common, backing off from confrontation in Ukraine, how is this any different from what Trump is proposing from the way Reagan talked to Gorbachev, or the way Brezhnev and Nixon talked, or Eisenhower talked to Khrushchev? I mean, this is a very serious relationship with the only other country on the planet that's capable of destroying us, and we have this mindless hatred being whipped up here. Red's under the bed, even though Moscow's not red anymore.
Right.
It's really something we haven't seen in decades, and I think it's very, very damaging and rather scary, both internationally and in a domestic political context.
Ray, we have seen some commentary that fits into what you've been telling us just a moment ago, and that is, when we look at whom the Russians might want to be president, there was something published by Nina Khrushcheva, who is the great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, who was the Soviet premier. And she wrote in this commentary piece, she said Putin might prefer Clinton. And the reason, she said, is because Clinton is measured, pragmatic, and more accustomed to Russian-style diplomacy.
Well, that may be, it's always a question of compared to what. Okay. Now
compared to Donald Trump.
You have Mr. Unpredictable on the one hand, and then you have Mrs. Very Predictable, who never saw a war that she didn't fall in love with, who has stoked up all kinds of havoc in the Middle East, not only Iraq, Syria, but Libya, where she was pretty much the godmother of that chaos.
Right.
And so it's really hard for me to think that Putin would have any preference here, It's hard for me to think that he would want somebody totally unpredictable, but by the same token, he knows Hillary Clinton and what she stands for. He knows that Victoria Nuland, who orchestrated the coup d'etat in Kiev on the 22nd.
Victoria Nuland was at the State Department.
Yeah, she was the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs.
Still is, isn't she?
And she still is, yeah. But she's a protege of Hillary Clinton. She was her public affairs person. So Hillary is very much a piece of what we call the neocons in Washington. And that means someone who thinks, or at least pretends to think, that the United States is the sole indispensable country of the world. Okay, now what does that make, by definition, all the other countries, whether it's Russia, China, or whatever? Well, by definition, that makes them dispensable. Well, people don't get it. Putin himself warned about that in an op-ed in the New York Times, just well, a couple of weeks after he pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire on Syria, okay? So we can get those things destroyed, and he did, okay? And he said, you know, I really treasure our new working relationship. This was September 11th, 2013, okay? Right. He said, I treasure our working relationship, but I have to disagree with the president on one thing, and that is that you really shouldn't give any people the notion that they are indispensable or so exceptional that they're apart from the rest of the world. The rest of the world is also worthy of respect. And when God looks down at everyone, says Mr. Putin, and I know that he wrote this paragraph himself, I know from a good source, he says, you know, he sees different kinds of people, but they're all equal under God's care. Well, yeah, I happen to believe that's to be true. But by definition, that's not U.S. policy. We are more equal than all other people.
Vladimir, in terms of whatever preference Russia would want, would President Putin prefer a President Clinton or President Trump? President Clinton, of course, as we've been discussing, would be someone who is a known quantity. President Trump is seen as erratic, unpredictable.
I would say that Russia, first of all, judges situation by the actions rather than the words. And I would say that in the recent years, the behavior of Democratic Party and Democratic leadership was rather unpredictable and rather dangerous. It's actually can very easily lead to further escalation, which will bring the whole world down. You know, there was a very strong kind of interaction which project Russian anger in Georgia in 2008. There's definitely a very unhealthy escalation of situation in Ukraine. So Russia knows that this democratic leadership is unbelievably dangerous and can lead to the whole explosion. So I would say I wouldn't reduce it to the question of personalities, Putin, Clinton, or Trump. I think the whole world should be concerned with the fact that current democratic leadership do not read signs, do not understand frustration of other countries. They push Russia and Ukraine. They push China and South Sea. And I think it's both dangerous and unpredictable. I think the person who says that he wants to make deals and negotiate sounds for me much more plausible. So I think it's a very serious situation. And I think Russia is definitely correctly concerned and correctly is interested in this, as the whole world should be interested. United States make it clear that they interfere in every part of the world, so it's not surprising that the whole world is interested in elections.
Jim, you want to say something?
Yeah. Ray earlier said that maybe the Russians wouldn't prefer Trump because he's unpredictable, whereas Hillary is predictable. But I guess I would disagree with that as well. I think she's so predictably bad, so predictably dangerous, that the Russians would look at Trump, I can't read their minds, but if I were in their shoes and say, look, here's somebody who's essentially a nationalist. He is not an ideologue of any sort that anybody can tell. He is not needlessly or gratuitously provocative in foreign policy terms. His attitude would be that of a businessman. Let's make a deal. Where do our interests coincide? Where they not coincide? Let's do some horse trading.
Okay, I want you to take a listen to what he told the American television network ABC a short while ago. Let's have a look at this.
If our country got along with Russia, that would be a great thing. When Putin goes out and tells everybody, and you talk about relationship, but he says Donald Trump is going to win and Donald Trump is a genius, and then I have people saying you should disavow. I said I'm going to disavow that. But when Putin says good things, and when we have a possibility of having a good relationship with Russia, I think that's good.
By bowing to his annexation,
we're not going to be bowing to anybody. Hey, George, you know me pretty well. I don't bow. Okay, I don't bow.
Does that translate into good foreign policy, or are we talking about a man who is vain?
I don't. Look, there are very few shrinking violets in the presidential field. Of course, there's an element of vanity with him, with Hillary Clinton, with any politician who aspires to be president. I don't think you can attribute it to vanity. Now, again, back to Mr. Morell saying this is how he was suckered in by Putin's nefarious psychological tricks because he played upon his vanity. I think you can't really take that seriously. I think he is saying exactly what I said earlier, that he sees that getting along is more beneficial to the interests of the United States and the American people than this gratuitous attitude of encroaching in other countries' space, right up to their borders and even within their borders in terms of our regime change and color revolution and other activities. I think what he's saying is, despite whatever you might think about a personal style and whether he's unpredictable or even erratic in some ways, is what he's saying making sense from a policy point of view compared to somebody who is such an ideologue in the style of, I would say, Clinton, George Bush, Obama, the whole continuum since really the end of the Cold War.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now. More of our conversation about the U.S. presidential race and future relations with Russia right after that. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.